with Dr. Rameshwar Dubey as our first speaker. We at Symbiosis
Ivanov from the Berlin School of Economics, and of course, a good friend of mine and a great enthusiast and a researcher in supply chain and particularly supply chain resilience. So welcome, Dr. Dmitry. Glad to have you here. Hearty welcome to all the participants of this very unique event. Dr. Ratna was trying to tell us about how we conceptualize this event, and then the whole idea here is twofold. Like I mentioned in the first webisode also, that SIOM is, wanted to host this event for two reasons. One is, of course, we wanted to bring the editors and the research writers on a single platform to have conversations on their deepest thoughts, on their hunches, on their views that are so critical to all of us as researchers and, of course, to our research publications. We also wanted to enthuse the researchers, academicians, and industry to find out their own unique role in contributing to the knowledge creation, for a better future as such. So Editor's Choice is a very new event from the SIOM's kitty of many events as such, with the vision of, being the learning and a research-oriented institute. We want to really contribute to nurture the dynamic culture of academic research. And I have always believed that editors are great designers of better knowledge, designers of better communicators, because through their reviews, I think we really understand how to communicate better and how to disseminate knowledge in much better fashion. So the design that they have in mind for our publications, is the learning we all wish to have through this Editor's Choice. So we are joined by faculties, researchers, and of course, students also. And this program is also being live streamed on YouTube. So I'm hoping that more people join in as we go further. It is my immense pleasure to welcome Dr. Dmitry, and over to you. Very happy as the director of SIOM to be, organizing this along with my team, Dr. Arun Kumar and Dr. Ratna, for the education fraternity as such. Over to you, Dr. Ratna. Maybe you could take over now. No, we can't hear you.
Vandana ma'am, we are facing, madam is facing some technical issues. So shall we start with the Dmitry sir's process session?
Yes, please. Yes.
Thank you, sir. Professor Dmitry sir, thank you. Thank you for accepting our invitation as well as welcome to the event. So welcome all participants to this program. So sir, over to you, sir. Thank you. You can start, sir. You can share your screen and start presentations. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much. Hello, everyone. My pleasure to share with you some thoughts and ideas. Thanks for joining this session. I'm Dmitry Ivanov, Professor of Supply Chain Operations Management in Berlin. So, and now I'm switching to my slides. So just wanted to share with you some live pictures from the video before we will look through the presentation. So, okay, I hope you can see my screen.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you, Aaron.
Yes.
Well, so the topic for our talk today is concerned with ripple effect in supply chains and new research directions in the COVID-19 pandemic context. The motivation for this webinar stems from several ideas. First, SIOM offers a very nice series of webinars with editors of international journals, which is a great initiative. In the first webinar, Professor Rameshwar Dubey talked about elements of good research that differentiate publication, say in the ABS4, ABDC A+ journals from the rest of publication. So with that talk, Rameshwar covered a lot of important issues, which definitely increased understanding of which papers are more acceptable in these journals and which features should be added to the paper, how you should shape the papers in order to publish in these rankings. I see my contribution to this series in one specific aspect, which became more and more popular in the last months. In different journals, I can see an increasing number of submissions related to the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on supply chains and their resilience. It is really a common trend in different international journals. So, and today I want to share with you a state of the art in this research and some open research directions in this particular area. So I am not going to talk in general about publications in journals. So I would like to address concerns of those of you who are researching and are currently writing papers on the impacts of COVID-19 pandemic on supply chains. And I think many of you are doing that. And just to share with you state of the art and promising open research direction in order to guide researchers in positioning their papers and contributions related to the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on supply chains and their resilience when you are targeting prestigious international journals. The key questions for our discussion today is, first, why should we care of the ripple effect and the associated risks in the supply chain? We will also look at the reasons of numerous supply chain collapses, which we can observe during the COVID-19 pandemic. And the ripple effect is one of the major stressors, one of the major reasons for these collapses. And finally, we will ask ourselves, does the existing supply chain resilience theory provide sufficient conceptual foundation, principles, and methods to help firms to survive and recover through the pandemic times when we have situations with the ripple effect? So we started with part number one, which has a key question of why should I care of disruption risks, resilience, and ripple effect in my supply chain? So if I put myself into position of a supply chain manager, to define supply chain resilience, consider the firm capability to withstand, adapt, and recover from disruptions, to meet customer demand and ensure some performance like service level or cost efficiency. If we talk about disruption, of course, it's a good idea to define it. And disruption is seen as an event which is not planned or anticipated and may interrupt material flows and change structures in a supply chain network. Examples are natural disasters, labor strikes, maybe terrorist attacks, and most recently, epidemics and global pandemics. To understand disruption and risk, I like considering an example of virus and immune system, right? So each of us has an immune system, and each of us is surrounded by a lot of viruses. Not only COVID-19, it's not the only virus, right? And why do we have an immune system? We have an immune system in order to protect ourselves against the viruses and to recover if we get sick. The same with the supply chain. Supply chains operate in the presence of a lot of disruption risks, and they need resilience to protect themselves against these risks, to avoid negative impacts on the performance. And in case if we have such an impact, resilience should help to recover quickly from the disturbed state to an old state or equivalent state, or maybe even a better one. One specific area of disruption is a ripple effect, right? So disruption can be a single disruption which hits one particular part in the supply chain, but does not propagate to further echelons. However, this is quite unusual situation. In most cases, disruption, when hitting one echelon, also hits other echelons. So it propagates across the network, right? If material is missing at one stage of the supply chain, the production cannot begin at the next stage, the subsequent stage cannot receive goods in distribution center, and so on and so on. Right? So that's why we say ripple effect. It's a situation, it's a specific kind of systemic disruption which changes structural dynamics through downstream propagation of disruption and the resulting downscaling and demand fulfillment as a result of a severe disruption. So we have three dimensions in the ripple effect, which are structural dynamics, which can change through the propagation of the disruption. Then we have impact on operational dynamics, say on the process control, inventory control policy, or production control policy. And we have the associated impact on the performance, like annual sales, annual revenues, service level, on-time delivery, cost efficiency, and so on. So we are concerned of how to mitigate this effect and how to recover once we have the ripple effect. Right? So our task is to analyze the impact, to stabilize, and recover. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of ripple effects have been observed. Right? So it's a classical example just at the beginning of the pandemic in February, March, when suppliers, a lot of suppliers located in Wuhan area in China were affected, and due to factory shutdowns and lockdowns in this area, there were interruptions in material flows to the first-tier suppliers, which were not able to deliver their modules, say, to automotive assembly plants, resulting in huge disruptions across the value networks. So we are looking at these situations. The ripple effect, it's a very special case of disruption risks, and it is distinctively different from operational risks, which are usually considered as bullwhip effect. Right? So I think many of you know bullwhip effect. So bullwhip effect describes situation where we have operational risks, right? And we have small variation of demand, which is propagating upstream the supply chain in terms of fluctuations in production and ordering quantities. With the ripple effect, we have another situation. We have a situation of low frequency, high impact effect. So we have exceptional events, low frequency, but the impact is very high because we have a severe disruption in supply of demand.
Dear participants, we request you to please mute your audio. Dear participants, we request you to please mute your videos. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, when looking at ripple effect through the pandemic, we should understand that pandemic is a new type of disruption, unlike anything before. Right? So a typical example of a ripple effect during the pandemic, say in the car manufacturing industry, we have production stop at the suppliers, then we have closing of ports in the logistics infrastructure, and this leads to production stops at OEM. So a classical ripple effect in the pandemic times. We should see the ripple effect has been one of the strongest stressors to supply chain resilience in the COVID-19 pandemic times. Because the companies have experienced unprecedented vulnerabilities in different areas like lead times, order quantities, demand fluctuations, and disruptions in network structures. Some data from the beginning of the pandemic showed that lead times and capacities have significantly fluctuating. So lead times increased by about 200%, and capacities, available capacities, have been reduced by 50%. Pandemic as a new type of disruption has three specific features. The first feature is long-term existence of disruption and its unpredictable scaling. And this is an understudied area in ripple effect research. So if you are looking at finding a new contribution to write a research paper, you can look at this aspect. Because the previous research considered ripple effect in terms of singular event-driven disruption, like a natural disaster. Right? You have an earthquake, it is a singular event, which has a very short-term duration. So it hits the supply chain and then it disappears, right? Pandemic is different. It does not disappear. It hits the supply chain and it continues to exist with unpredictable dynamics. The second specific feature is simultaneous disruption and epidemic outbreak propagation. So on the other hand, we have two parallel effects, ripple effect propagation and epidemic propagation, meaning that you have lockdowns and shutdowns in different regions, which means you have in different supply chain echelons disruptions with different timing. Right? Sometimes you have simultaneous closure of markets and suppliers. Sometimes you have sequential opening and closure. Right? So in one country, factories reopen, and in the next supply chain echelon, factories are closing. Right? So this is very interesting timing setting, which you can take as second research direction, where you can achieve novelty. This has not been considered before. And third specific feature is simultaneous severe disruption in supply, demand, and logistics. Right? Such a combination has never been considered before. It is a novel, complex setting where you have both forward and backward disruption propagation. Right? Okay, excellent. So to continue, I would like to offer some first observations on firms' operations during the COVID-19 pandemic. If you look at the last 10 months of this year, we can see that in most of the cases, redundant resilience strategies, such as risk mitigation inventories or subcontracting capacities, backup supply infrastructures, have not really helped much, surprisingly. The reasons are that disruption period is very long. Such redundant resilience strategies like inventory or backup facilities are very good for short-term disruptions, right? Where you have, say, 1 month of a disruption period. Disruption hits you only one time at the beginning, and then you need somehow to survive through this period of disruption and recover. Then inventory backup is very good. Pandemic is different. It does not hit you from the very beginning with its strongest part. The beginning, it's quite smooth, and it's actually good because we now have time to prepare our supply chain for a long-term disruption. The bad news is that pandemic is long, and this unusual situation for supply chain will exist very long. That's why more promising ways for managing supply chain resilience in the pandemic times are related to adaptability. Adaptability, agility, flexibility, and usage of data-driven real-time monitoring system to increase supply chain visibility. So what we can see is that agile capacities have enabled firms to repurpose their supply chain. Right? Famous examples are luxury goods manufacturers that transformed their operations to completely new and different supply chain design to produce hand sanitizers or other imported goods, right? Like this area. And another example is the many car manufacturing companies shifted from car manufacturing supply chain to personal protection equipment supply chain, like ventilators or face shields, right? So in other words, our conclusion is that adaptation capabilities play the most important role when managing supply chains under pandemic disruptions. So far about a ripple effect and its specifics in the pandemic features. Now we would like to see state of the art, how the existing methods, modeling methods can help to model a ripple effect in pandemic times, to mitigate it and to recover once we have it in place. It is conveniently to look at the application of different modeling methods when looking at pandemic classification of World Health Organization. This has 5 stages, starting from anticipation of a pandemic, its early detection, containment stage, control, mitigation, and elimination stage. At each of these 5 stages, the existing operations research methods and modeling methods can help to cope with the ripple effect. The variety of methods can be classified into 3 areas: network, complexity theories, then mathematical optimization, and simulation. Each of these areas has specific focus, specific tools, and with the help of each of these areas, we can obtain different managerial insights. So what we know so far, we can see that research papers on the network level mostly used to find associations between different network structures and risk propagations. So they analyze trying to identify critical network elements and understand interdependencies in the supply chain. The optimization research mostly looks at optimizing recovery plans, so finding optimal reconfiguration of material flows according to some disruption propagation scenarios, and to reallocate supply and demand under conditions of changing supply chain structures. Simulation studies look at the dynamics. They look at analyzing impacts of disruption propagation and different time-dependent effects on disruption propagation on supply chain behaviors in patterns and dynamics. Agent-based studies, so complex adaptive systems, for example, also look at individual behaviors of firms in supply chains. Each of these methods is useful for different managerial insights. With the help of network theory, we can obtain useful managerial insights about identification of disruption scenarios. We can stress test our supply chain design to understand which network is more prone to disruption risk propagation. We can also identify critical suppliers and facilities in the supply chain. Mathematical optimization can help managers to stress test supply chain production distribution plans when disrupted network is considered. It's also used to analyze preparedness for disruption plans and recovery plans. With simulation, we can offer to supply chain managers insights on how to analyze dynamics of disruption propagation if you include production and inventory control policies. And it can also help to simulate operations policies during the disruption, in transition to recovery, and in the post-recovery periods. So just to illustrate, simulation analysis of the ripple effects through the COVID-19 pandemic, we considered a supply network, a global supply network with some factories in China, distribution centers in across different countries, and many customers. So then we analyzed the situation when we have a ripple effect due to the pandemic. So the Chinese factories are closing. And we looked at 3 different scenarios, because with simulation, you can look at different scenarios. The scenario 1 was that we have only local lockdown in China and epidemic. So epidemic propagation is localized. It is not spread all over the world. The second scenario was if it is not localized and disruption spreads, so the virus it's spreading all over the world and affects operations and normal life in terms of shutdowns, quarantine measures, and lockdowns all over the world. And then we also looked at markets are disrupted, so the most severe scenario. We also consider different duration of disruption, so short duration, medium term, and long term duration. And this resulted in about 40 different experiments subject to different scenarios, different durations, and different propagation speeds. Some very interesting results have been observed there, which, because of the timing of the webinars, I would not like to discuss very detailed. You can look at this paper in Transportation Research. Interestingly, we can observe that 3 major observations appear. The first major observation is that supply chain reaction depends on the timing and scaling of disruption propagation. So ripple effect is very crucial. And also on the sequence of facility closing and opening at different stages. So in some cases, we have seen that if different countries introduce lockdown measures at the same time, simultaneously, or if different countries introduce these measures at different times, it has very strong impact on the supply chain performance. And we can also see that if different components in the supply chain are affected sequentially or simultaneously, meaning manufacturing, warehousing, and logistics and markets, it can, in some cases, it can lead to very low effects, but in some cases, the supply chains are really collapse and become paralyzed when we have some overlapping time windows in disruption and ripple effect propagation. So to finalize, I would like to look at some future research area which can be considered as promising avenues to study resilience and ripple effect in COVID-19 pandemic terms. So specifically, we are going to look at these 5 areas. First of all, digital supply chain twins, the viability as a new overarched perspective of resilience, intertwined supply networks, multi-structural dynamics, and reconfigurable supply chain. Right, so these 5 areas are very new frameworks, which, while being immensely important and welcomed in practice, have not received sufficient consideration in research. And a lot of works are now in progress in these 5 directions. And I think there is a lot of potential to make a meaningful, significant contribution when positioning your research in one of these or several of these areas. So let us look at these areas. First of all, during the pandemic, we have seen that companies with supply chain visibility have performed much better as companies without visibility. As such, digital supply chain has been seen as competitive advantage, as resilience capability, very important resilience capability of supply chain, right? So digital twin is more or less a digital supply chain model, which represents a physical supply chain with actual transportation, inventory, demand, and capacity data. As such a digital twin can be used by managers for planning and real-time control decisions. We published a paper, I think this one, in production planning and control, which presents one technology for implementing digital supply chain twin using any logistics simulation software, where we built our supply chain model and connect it with another system, big data analysis of risk data, and with performance analysis. In other words, you have 3 stages. You have risk data system, you have supply chain model, and you have performance analysis. So this is one way how to design a digital supply chain twin. And here a lot of different research areas can be observed for different disciplines, for management, for computer science, for engineering. And this is something which I very like in our topics, because we can conduct multidisciplinary research, combining perspectives of management, engineering, and data science. The next direction, it's viable supply chain. The COVID-19 pandemic laid out a set of completely novel decision-making situations that go beyond resilience scope, right? So first of all, resilience considers situation where you bounce back to old normal once you are hit by disruption. However, through the pandemic, we have seen that it is impossible to bounce back in many cases, because old normal does not exist anymore. You can also only bound forward and adapt to new normal. As such, we need a new concept, and I have seen several publications in journals which recognized this issue and are trying to offer this new perspective, which goes beyond the traditional resilience understanding. One of these perspectives is viability, which we consider as the ability of a supply chain to maintain itself and survive in a changing environment through redesign of structures and replanning of performance with long-term impacts. Because we say survive, we should define it, right? So we define survivability of a supply chain as its ability to continue to exist and secure the provision of society with products and services of vital needs by adapting network designs and functions to radically changing environment. So it's no more about analysis of how one particular firm can return to its normal and improve its performance. It's about securing provision of society with critically needed services like food service, mobility service, communication service, in order to survive at a long term. The viable supply chain model, which has been offered in a recent paper in Annals of Operations Research, has several dimensions. On one hand, it has ecosystem dimension. It also has multi-structural dimensions. And here in this slide, I am showing adaptable design dimension, which means that supply chain designs and supply chain network optimization, which is a classical problem in supply chain research, can be extended from a single design to multiple designs, like, for example, design for efficiency, design for resilience, and design for survivability. Right? And most important, we need to define a rule for adaptation between different designs according to several stressors like demand fluctuations, natural disaster, or even global pandemic. As a viability can be seen as an overarched resilience perspective. So I say resilience, it's an ability to bounce back to old normal, right? So you have a disruption, then you stabilize, and then you bounce back to new normal, to recover plans, to old normal, to recover performance. The viability takes another perspective. It says adaptation to a new normal to survive in radically changed internal and external conditions. So it has completely different profile, right? It is open system. Resilience, it's a closed system, and viability is open system. We have a super disruption and structural changes in the old normal. So old normal does not exist anymore. There is no way to bounce back, to close this loop. That's why we search for and adapt to a new normal. And then we stabilize in this new normal and recover the performance, right? So that's why viability, it's a very interesting perspective where a lot of contributions can be achieved. And I highly encourage you to position your research in the supply chain viability area. So to differentiate resilience and viability, I would like to offer a very simple example. So we can understand the difference in a simple form. Just imagine you are driving a car. Why we are driving a car? In an operational view, we are driving cars to get fast at some destinations, at a short time. But strategically, we are driving cars to stay mobile, right? And if a car breaks down, then it should be repaired. For the time of service, one can receive another car as a substitute, and then you receive your car in an old or equivalent or even better state. And this is a classical resilience profile: disruption, backup, recovery, and old normal. However, if the car cannot be repaired anymore, we should adapt structurally. One can start using public transportation to stay mobile, or one can purchase a new car. And in both cases, the decisions are driven to adapt by strategic objective to stay mobile, and not by some operational objective, to get faster to some destinations. And this is a viability case, right? Disruption, search for and adaptation to new normal, and recovery in this new normal. Another interesting framework which has been offered in the recent research is a reconfigurable supply chain. The reconfigurable supply chains integrates perspectives of efficient, resilient, sustainable, and digital supply chains, to design and operate frameworks which are extensively using technology with sustainability dimensions, which are resilient and profitable. So if you are interested in such integrated perspective, this is a literature recommendation where you can get some ideas. The next promising future research area is intertwined supply network. So, supply chains are frequently intersecting with each other, which means different supply chains can have a shared supply base. For example, suppliers in automotive sector are at the same time producers of valves for respirators in the healthcare sector. Many companies in electronics industry, for example, have a very large part of common suppliers. So they have shared supplier base. And this supply chain intertwining, it's a very interesting effect, which has not received much research attention so far. There are publications on this topic. One of them is shown here on this slide. However, there are also some others, but it is definitely a very good area where you can produce contribution with sufficient novelty to satisfy criteria of top journals. Right? Look at intertwined supply networks and analyze resilience, but also other components of other supply chain management decisions which are related to these networks, like inventory management or sourcing strategies or some others. Another interesting perspective on future research in the ripple effect, it's named multistructural dynamics. So usually supply chain researchers are looking at organizational structure, right? So at network design, and see how different backup suppliers or how different backup facilities help to improve resilience. However, we should notice that supply chains are multistructural systems, right? As noted in some publications. They have not only organizational structures, they also have product structures, so bill of materials. Right? Take example of COVID-19 pandemic. If you are producing cars, or if you are producing face shields or ventilators, you have completely different product structures, right? Which immediately influence all other structures. Supply chains also have process structures, right? They also have technological structure. Again, if you are producing perfumes or if you are producing hand sanitizers, you have two different technological structures, and this immediately affects decisions and strategies in all other structures in the supply chain. You also have logistic structure and financial structure and information structure. Looking at information structure, we can think, for example, of cyber risk of cyber attacks. Very interesting research area where there is only a few papers which make contributions on disruptions in information structure. So I think I'm quite done with what I wanted to share with you. To summarize, we looked at the ripple effect, and ripple effect describes the impact of disruption propagation on supply chain performance and the associated change in supply chain structures and processes. The theory offers a large variety of methods to support supply chain adaptations and reconfigurations to the ripple effect. The pandemic appears to be a new type of supply chain disruption risk, so-called super disruption. We should understand, and pandemic provides a lot of evidence that resilience can be costly. However, the missing resilience can be fatal for the company. In this setting, there are some future research areas which I encourage you to consider when thinking of how to position your research results. The first area is digital supply chain twin. We will shift from offline modeling to data-driven digital supply chain understanding. Next, exploring ripple effect in the settings of viability, viable supply chain, and intertwined supply networks are very interesting future research direction. I also encourage you to look at novel frameworks like reconfigurable supply chain network or low certainty need LCN supply chain network, which considers resilience in light of value creation, sustainability. And basically, agenda for supply chain resilience theory for the next years is to create knowledge about super long disruptions. How we should be prepared and act in the pandemic-like situations which appear from time to time, in our lives. And this knowledge is quite underdeveloped and can be considered as an interesting and important future research perspective. So here I summarized some sources. So I think this presentation is recorded. So if you will look at the presentation once again, you will have some references in the slides, and here you see the full reference list to different references used in this presentation. And you can also take a look at some additional materials in the recently published book. So in the textbook for students, where we have special chapters on risk management and resilience, and also in specific books looking at ripple effects, structural dynamics, and resilience. Thank you very much for your attention, for your interest, and I will be happy to continue this webinar with the discussion and to answer your question.
Thank you very much, sir. We now move on to the question answer round. Very similar to our previous webisodes, we have received an overwhelming response from the research fraternity for this webisode as well. Though a number of researchers have put forth their questions, it would not be possible for us to take up all the questions here due to the time constraints. We, however, thank the researchers for the questions that they've sent to us, and we shall definitely try accommodating them in our future webisodes. So the first question comes from Professor Anita from Kongu University. Professor Anita, could you please unmute yourself and ask the question, please?
Yes, ma'am. Good afternoon, ma'am. Good afternoon,
Very
sir.
good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Really a nice session, sir. I want some share some tips on building collaborations with international researchers. Regarding your views, please.
Okay, thank you. Yes, so I really like collaboration, global collaboration. If you would look at my publications, I have published with colleagues from all over the world, from India, from China, from United States, from European countries, from Russia, from Australia, and it enriches our research. So global coordination of research, global collaboration brings different perspectives, knowledge. Because even if we look at standard problems like network design or inventory control in different countries and different universities, there are so many interesting knowledge which is not available if we just research locally. In integrating these perspectives, we definitely provide value added to global research community. And in order to build global collaborations, of course, very good opportunity, it's international conference, right? Unfortunately, now we are not in this position, and at least we can have some digital conferences. Another issue is to read publications in international journals, and maybe to find authors, people who are researching in similar areas as you are doing, and then just contact them, make a short proposal so that you have an interesting draft, and asking people, would you be interested to work with me on this draft, so showing value for these people, of course, working on it. I would discourage sending, ready paper in the almost final shape to some people and saying, could you please make some, polishing edits and give your name to this paper? It's not a good thing. I think not many people will do that. So most of the people whom I know and myself prefer to be included from the very beginning stage in a new collaboration project so that we can shape the paper, we can understand its development. And in this sense, it's also good for all of us, also for young scholars, to be able to collaborate with senior scholars, and we can share our knowledge and promote ideas in global community. It's a great question. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot, sir.
Thank you, sir. The next question comes from Dr. Adi from SIES. Dr. Adi, are you around?
No, ma'am. For him, please.
Yeah. So I would read the question on his behalf. His question is, how do we identify prospective topics for research on COVID-related supply chain issues? Which one would you recommend?
Well, okay, so I think in this webinar was especially done to answer your question. So anyway, to summarize, the COVID-19 pandemic is one specific type of disruption. Right? At the same time, we should understand that literature on supply chain resilience and disruption is very rich. right? And there is no need to start investigating the topic from the very beginning. Of course, we should look at the existing body of knowledge on the supply chain resilience in general. And then we should try to understand what is the difference between the pandemic and other disruptions. So I tried to point out to these issues, throughout the webinar, what are the differences of a pandemic as a new kind of a disruption. So basically we should understand the key difference. Classical disruption, it's an event that hits a supply chain once a time and then it disappears. Disruption, it's say system in system disruption. It is not a single time event. It is situation which is with us for a long period of time. So it is a disruption which has its own dynamic, like system and system dynamics. And starting from there are a lot of opportunities, to develop contributions considering these specific topics of disruption.
Thank you, sir. So the next question comes from Ms. Nidhi from SIOM. May I request Ms. Nidhi to ask her question? Nidhi, can you please unmute yourself and ask the question, please?
Good afternoon, sir. I'm Nidhi Shetty, student of Symbiosis Institute of Operations Management. And my question to you is that which are the journals in the areas of supply chain management and operations management that we as a students should target to publish during our MBA?
Okay, so publishing during MBA should be encouraged. It is a very good idea. So, and I hope you have enough time to do that apart from your major MBA studies. So, but anyway, so first of all, of course, it makes sense to read some literature in different journals, like say in very high level journals, but also say in more applied journals, because in MBA, you must look at the application areas, like as business and management, so to look at applied journals and see if what you are doing fits into what they are writing about, right? In terms of topic, in terms of methodological rigor, in terms of requirements of data on complexity of the system and so on, right? So sometimes, so I would not say that is a usual situation that MBA students publish. And however, so I think I published with two my former MBA students based on their MBA thesis. Right? So it is possible, but this should be clear from the very beginning that data collection should be done in the proper way. Writing skills should be there. Right? So, and also willingness to spend time on this, right? Because writing papers and working with reviewers, it's not only about writing paper and submit it, right? It will be reviewed, and then you should revise it. And so you should also keep in mind that you need some time resources for doing that. But otherwise, so why not? So go ahead.
Thank you, Nidhi. Thank you, sir. The next question comes from Dr. Ramkrishna Manatkar from SIOM. Sir, could you please unmute yourself and ask the question?
Yeah, good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Yeah. My question to you is which interdisciplinary areas in the supply chain should a researcher explore? And which journal would you suggest for publishing such research?
Okay, very good question. And I personally, I like multidisciplinary research very much because at the university, for example, I studied industrial engineering and management. Then I worked in consulting company for ERP system, so computer science. And then I'm researching in management. So that's why, regardless of the topics, I really like publications which try to combine different views. Like, for example, in about 2 months ago, we published in International Journal of Production research paper, Multidisciplinary Perspectives on Industry 4.0, where we made a survey what researchers worldwide are thinking about Industry 4.0, management researchers, industrial engineering researchers, and computer science researchers. And we have observed that management people understand Industry 4.0 in one sense. Industrial engineers understand Industry 4.0, as machines and robots and all other things. And computer science people understand Industry 4.0 as data, as protocols, as visibility, and all this stuff. And if you put these different views together, management view, business model, profitability, flexibility, engineering view, machines, robots, cobots, and data science view, information systems, and so you get an integral view, understanding as a whole. Otherwise, you see only fragments. The second part of your question, where to publish this research? This becomes complicated because you have management journals which have some tradition and some expectation on the writing style and topics. You have industrial engineering journals, where have other expectations and so on. Not easy to find journal which would accept and welcome such multidisciplinary research. Well, I think since I'm editor in IGPI, International Journal of Production Research, IGPI is very welcome in terms of multidisciplinary studies. It nicely combines industrial engineering culture, operations management culture, technology culture, and also information system research. Right. Another journal which also welcomes multidisciplinary studies, International Journal of Production Economics. They also look in this area. And otherwise, there are also some other journals maybe which I am not aware of, but same for IGPR, multidisciplinary research is very much welcome.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now I would take the opportunity to ask you a question myself, sir. What would be the 3 top reasons for rejection in journals such as International Journal of Production Research and International Journal of Transaction and Operations Research?
Well, it is always it's also a difficult situation for editors to reject, right? So it is a pain which an editor should go through. It is the situation which I don't like in our work as an editor. So I want to help good papers to be delivered, to be developed to excellent papers with the help of reviewers and by my comments. Well, so of course, if we receive a paper, first of all, we look at if it is readable, it is understandable. Right? So unfortunately, in many cases, papers are written not very understandable, very difficult to understand, and maybe terminology which is used is not so clear. Right? So this is also a very frequent reason for rejection because so I can see there are some ideas, some good ideas in the paper, but the paper as a whole is not readable. Too many grammatical errors, too many, too poor presentation, too many repetitions of the same source, so logical flow, it's not clear, and so on. So it is the second reason is novelty, right? So it is strongly recommended for authors to state from the very beginning an introduction how they contribute to the existing state of the art. Right? So if I cannot see such a statement in introduction, it is also very likely that the paper will be rejected because we want to see, a contribution. And that's why the authors should really spend a lot of time in introduction to show that what they are doing, why they are doing that, and how it extends our knowledge, why it is relevant, why the results matter, So once we see it, okay, it is a good indication that the paper would pass editor stage and go to review. Right, so the third problem. So now I'm talking about editor rejection, right? So poor writing and no novelty. And then if we look at review stage, well, it is very subjective. So it's very subjective, difficult to say because there are so many competent reviewers and each of them offers their own perspective. Maybe one important direction is that why papers are frequently rejected because the result presentation or the general presentation of the paper does not meet expectation of a particular journal. The paper can be good, but this can be sent to false outlet, right? For example, for IGPR, you can look at the website. We have 10 criteria which papers should meet when submitting to IGPR. So relevance to real production system. They should be understandable for production managers. So they should progress state of the art, right? For example, if you have very mathematical papers where you only have formula derivations, and so production managers, engineers will have hard time understanding such a very technical paper. That's why it's better maybe to submit to international transactions operational research, which explicitly welcome mathematical papers, right? So that's why when submitting paper, when thinking of journal, please also look at expectations of the journal. So, so which papers have been published in journal, how they look like. This could also give kind of indications of what is expectation of the editors. Right, so maybe this 3-point writing, novelty, and fit to the scope of particular journal.
Thank you, sir. There is one more question in the chat box which was asked by Mr. Naveen Dev, and it is that how lean supply chain can be balanced with redundancy required in pandemic environment.
Oh, okay, very, very good question. So indeed, so the traditional understanding in resilience theory, it's lean and resilience are conflicting objectives. So if you are lean, you are not resilient. If you are resilient, you are not lean. But it's too simple, right? There are different lean combinations, lean structures, which can be resilient. And resilient structure can also be lean under some circumstances. Of course, resilience is expensive. We should understand it. But at the same time, appropriate usage of resilience can also lead to better efficiency. Right? Just imagine, we all know from the theory that if we increase number of distribution centers, we decrease transportation costs. So it is good for efficiency, but it's also good for resilience. The more distribution centers, the more backups you have in supply chain. You have disruption in one distribution center, you can switch to another one. So you have a measure where you increase both efficiency and resilience. That's why it is a very good research direction also to try to find something where you improve both efficiency and resilience. We have published a paper on this topic, which is named Low Certainty Need Supply Chain Framework in IGPR, where we defined new concept, resilience. Resilience meaning resilient plus lean. So that's a great question. And for example, if you look at the pandemic time, well, this is quite a new paper, and we have not finalized all experiments, but for example, we have observed in this new research that lean supply chains can perform much better when recovering from the pandemic. Lean supply chains have lower inventory, right? And if you have lower inventory, you can avoid disruption tails and disruption overlays when recovering from the pandemic. If you have huge inventory in the supply chain, you can imagine a huge number of inventory is rippling through the supply chain, creating huge inefficiency. But if you have low inventory, well, so you can recover much more efficient. Of course, high inventory can help to survive through the pandemic. But when recovering, it makes more sense to reduce inventory to avoid disruption tails and this huge, destabilization in supply chain with huge inventory. It's a great question. Yes, thanks a lot.
One last question by our director, Dr. Vandana Sonwane. Ma'am, would you please ask your question?
Yeah, thank you. Before that, we have another interesting question in the chat. So maybe Dr. Ivanov would like to answer that. Senthil Kumar is asking, can you suggest directions that combines finance with supply chain resilience?
It is a very, very great point. So, because what we have now is that many problems in supply chains are stemming not from material flow areas, they are stemming from financial area. Liquidity is missing in the supply chain. Many firms are trying to survive, literally to survive, because of the missing cash in the firms, especially small and medium enterprises, they are really thinking in terms of weeks, not in terms of months. How long can they continue? How long can they keep operating under this pandemic crisis? Because in simple words, money is missing, right? So that's why it is a huge research area to try to investigate how finance management issues can help firms to survive and increase resilience in the pandemic times. For example, large companies can maybe share some financial reserves or some liquidity with small and medium enterprises with their supplier to help them to survive. It will help both companies. If supplier would go bankruptcy, if supplier would disappear, the big company will not have ability to assemble its final product, right? So that's why it is a very, very, very great area. Another issue is, for example, just imagine if you look at backup suppliers, right? So the classical resilience strategy is to have backup supplier. So say I am assembly plant, OEM, original equipment manufacturer, and I have a primary supplier, and then I am selecting a backup supplier. So I'm doing it by myself, selection of the backup supplier. But why not to ask my primary supplier that this supplier would take care of a backup? So not myself will select the backup, but my single source supplier would be responsible for finding a backup or to recover the supply if this supply is disrupted. Right? This implies a lot of interesting financial issues, like so contracting issues between the suppliers and all this stuff. So there are a lot of interesting potential points. Yes.
Thank you. So I just have one question or a curiosity, actually. This pandemic has really upheavaled or brought to the surface many disruptions in supply chain of various industries, irrespective of sectors or whatever. So the disruptions are so huge that everything went topsy-turvy, and suddenly we understood that there are a lot of sourcing centers and there's a lot of concentration, which may not be have been a good strategy. So I was wondering, did we as researchers miss some research gaps because we could not research on it that time, and then suddenly the pandemic sort of showcased this particular disruption there? So do you feel that we missed certain research gaps while things were all well, so that we could not address the pandemic issues?
Okay, so it's a great point, because so we also have disruption in our research life, right? So we and this is a situation where we should, on one hand, of course, we should react to the most important issue is practice, and we should produce research which is practically relevant and takes into account reality of this pandemic time. At the same time, we are also teaching online. We are preparing. We are restructuring our systems, so which so it's a drag on research. So that's why it is, on one hand, it is a great. I think it is a sweet hour for supply chain risk management researchers. They were maybe waiting for this super disruption, to show importance of all this knowledge, and it also motivates, it inspires for new ideas. But at the same time, we can also see that many of our topics have clear research gaps because we have not prepared, say, strategies and answers for many questions which were encountered through this pandemic. And that's why we should learn, we should observe what happens, we should learn from there. And in the next years, we should develop principally a new body of knowledge, which can be used for well, I hope next pandemic will not come very soon, but if it comes, that we would be equipped. Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Wanda.
Over to you, Dr. Arun Kumar or Ratna.
Dr. Arun Kumar, would you want to say something?
No, ma'am. Just thank you to sir for sharing this much information. So I received the messages from so many participants that they are very much enjoying this session and they are asking for the video. So listen again and again. They are not able to write down the notes, etc. Okay, sir. So thank you, sir. Thank you for sharing this much information within this much short period of time. Thank you very much, sir. I will keep in touch with you, sir. Okay, okay, sir.
So, thank you, Dr. Arun Kumar. Before we bid adieu, I would like to propose the vote of thanks. We thank our very, very accomplished researcher and our speaker for the day, Dr. Dmitry Ivanov, for accepting our invitation to address and spend time with the research community. He is an editor of International Journal of Integrated Supply Chain Management, an associate editor of International Journal of Production Research, International Transactions and Operations Research, International Journal of System Science. He is also on the editorial board of a number of reputed journals and a guest editor in a number of journals such as International Journal of Production Economics, International Journal of Production Research, Annals of Operations, and the list goes on. Thank you so much, sir, for your talk on the ripple effect in the supply chains and the new research directions in the COVID-19 pandemic context. This has provided many insights for each one of us, and I'm sure we would explore newer areas for research in the days to come. We thank each member in the audience for their participation in the second webisode. Thank you, Dr. Anita, Dr. Adi, Ms. Nidhi, Dr. Ramkrishna for your questions. This event couldn't have taken shape without the support and the able guidance of our director, Dr. Vandana. Today's webisode is a culmination of the efforts of our faculty in charge, Dr. Arun Kumar and his research committee team. We thank our faculty and staff for their support extended, and we shall be floating a feedback form shortly. We request the participants to kindly take time off and fill it, and also share with us the topics on which you wish to hear from the editors speak in the future episodes. An important announcement, we have on the screen an interesting book authored by Professor Dmitry. Please do consider purchasing it. And just to end the session, I ended with a quote by Swami Vivekananda: all power is within you. You can do anything and everything. On this note, join us for the next webisode of the Editor's Choice on the 11th November, where Professor Alte, the co-editor, Journal of Humanitarian Logistics and Supply Chain Management, would be addressing us. Until then, happy researching. I, Dr. Ratna Paluri, sign off. Thank you. Thank you very much, sir.
Yes, thanks a lot. Thank you for invitation. It was my pleasure to deliver this webinar. It's excellent organization. Thank you for invitations. You know, so my university and Symbiosis are partner universities. So it's really great to have this webinar. I'm happy to do that.
Thank you.